All right, let's take a look at the lessons. We're talking about our strength through our differences. How do we find strength in our differences? We talked about our differences by personality. Every one of us is one of four personalities: a lion, an otter, a retriever, or a beaver. We also talked about the difference we are as male and female. We talked about our differences physically, not just the obvious physical differences, but other differences that make us unique and react to things differently. Also talked about our mental differences. Our brains are different and the way we think. And then we're talking today about our social differences. Letter C there, the social differences. That's at the bottom of the other page. There's like two notes to fill in at the bottom of the previous page, and then we'll get on to the next one. So if you didn't get the previous page, you can see the ushers afterwards and get a copy of that. But we're different in how we socialize one with another. And number one, women express feelings, men express facts. Women express feelings, men express facts. When women talk, they tend to talk about feelings and how they felt and what was involved there, where men talk about just the facts. There was a program on when I was growing up called Dragnet, and the detective in that program, whenever you talk to interview a witness, he'd say, "Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts." And that's the way men are. We want the facts, where women want to talk about the emotions and the feelings and all that's involved with that. Women are more prone to talk about what they're thinking and feeling and to demonstrate how they feel with either tears, facial expressions, hand gestures, and body language. And so women will use all of that to express the emotion that they're going through. Where men generally speak and they tend to process their emotions inwardly and not show them outwardly. And so we're very different in that way. Secondly, women want to understand the emotion. Men deal with information. And so women, when they're discussing an issue, they tend to talk about how they feel. They want to know how you feel. They want to talk about how the kids feel and how other people feel. They want to deal with the emotion that is going on at the time or the emotion that is created by that situation. Where what men want to do is they want to say, well, let's kind of list out number one, number two, number three, number four, and we just want to go through the information and deal with the facts. Number three is men speak an average of about 12,000 words a day, and women speak an average of about 25,000 words a day, which basically means that I'm done listening long before my wife is done talking. And that makes it difficult sometimes in that process, especially if the wife is a stay-at-home mom. For many years, my wife was stay-at-home with little kids. And with little kids, the only word she would use is word no. That was about the primary word she used throughout the day. And so by the time I got home, she still had 23,470 words left to use. And I'm a pastor, and all I do all day long is talk to people. And when I get done, I was well beyond my quota. I was already in the negative on my words, and that didn't always work out very well. Now, one of the things that one woman said when she heard this, that men speak an average of 12,000 words a day and women speak an average of 25,000 words a day, she said that's because women have to repeat everything twice to their husbands, and that's why they use so many more words. I'm not sure if that's true or not. But the problem is, in most marriages, we as men are done listening and done talking long before our wife is finished. And so we have to work at that. And women tend to be more verbal as a rule. They did a study one time of children on a playground. They put microphones out in the playground, and little kids were out there playing. And these were kids that were toddlers just learning how to talk. And as they listened to the recordings afterwards, almost all the boys, instead of verbalizing, they were making noise like rum, 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 and boom, boom, and all kinds of things like that, where the girls were actually making, if they didn't talk, they at least made sounds like they were actually words. And it's very, very different from the time we're born. This is not something that is taught. This is something that is caught. It is something that is ingrained in us by the DNA that God created us with as male and female. And so we need to understand that. As a man, I need to realize that my wife has got more to say, and I need to be willing to listen, and she needs to hear more than just just the facts and just the basic information. And sometimes I need to learn to talk more and to verbalize what I'm feeling, or at least to listen to what she's feeling in the process as well. And this is where a lot of conflict comes in, whether it's in an argument or whether it's in just a discussion, or whether it's just when the husband comes home from work or when both of you come home from work. She probably wants to talk more than you talk, and she probably wants to talk about things that you have already internalized and you're really not interested. In fact, you don't even want to open that box up. And so that becomes an area of conflict and a problem between us as husbands and wives. I know it is in our relationship, because I'm not a talker. You'd say, well, you're a pastor, you talk all the time. That's the problem. I've done talking, and I'm really not a good conversationalist. And so many times she says to me, you don't talk to me. And I have to work at that, and it's not always easy to do. And so we need to realize that and understand that. Number 4 is men seek solutions, women want understanding. When there's a problem, men want to figure out what's the solution. How are we going to fix this problem? Where what a woman wants is she wants to be understood. And then once we understand one another, then maybe we can look for a solution, which is very frustrating for men, because we want to go directly to the solution and bypass all of the talking about it and all of the emotion involved with it. And we don't really want to listen to what the problem is. We just want to solve the problem. And this is what frustrates a lot of women. They don't want you to tell them how to fix it. They just want you to listen to them first. And that's a hard thing, again, for us as men to do. There's many times my wife has looked me in the eyes and said, don't preach at me. I am not your congregation. And what I want to do is, when there's a problem, I want to preach the solution. Here's the solution, and thus saith the Lord, and fix the problem. And she doesn't want to hear that. What she wants me to do is listen to the problem and understand how she feels about the problem, which still sends shivers up my spine, because that's not the way I'm built. I want to immediately say, but we can do this. I should get this video for you to watch. There's a great video about communication, and there's a lady that she's got a nail sticking right in her forehead, and she's wanting to talk to her husband about the problem. What he's wanting to do is pull the nail out, and that's the way we men are. We see the nail sticking in your forehead, and we want to pull it out, and you want to say, but I feel bad right now, and you want to talk about our feelings. And so we've got to learn, men, to listen to our wives, to allow them to use up some of those 25,000 words, to express their emotions and their feelings without immediately giving her a solution. Now, ladies, you need to understand that if your husband walks away without giving you a solution, he is going to be frustrated. He is going to feel like, I've not done my job. He is designed to come up with a solution by God. And you need to allow him at some point to say, let's pull the nail out, and to come up with that solution. So we need to work at that. Men don't like to talk things out. I like to work things out. And she feels like I've left her out of the process when I do that. And so I've got to give her the opportunity to share the emotion, to share the feeling, to talk through the problem before I try to solve her problem. Now, number 5, men are objective, women are subjective. Now, what do we mean by that? Subjectivity is judgment based upon individual personal impressions and feelings and opinions rather than external facts. See, again, when a woman looks at a situation, she doesn't look at just the facts of the situation. She is trying to read the emotions of it. She's trying to look for the little nuances. She's got all those things that are involved in that process. And so that's why when you're talking to your wife, not only is she listening to the words that you're saying, but she is reading your body language. She's paying attention to tone. Remember, we talked about women had a better ability to discern tones. She's hearing the tone of the words you're using, and she's even looking at what the weather is right now. I mean, everything is involved in that process. And she doesn't just look at the facts. Now, when a man, he just kind of focuses on those facts, kind of like the little cartoon there, she's there, tone, inflection, point of view, double meaning, innuendo, hidden messages. And what's he thinking about when she's talking? Oh, pepperoni. That's good. We just tend to look at the facts of the moment rather than all of these other things involved in there. So men tend to be more objective in how they view things. And so that means striving as far as is possible or practical is to reduce or eliminate biases, prejudice, or subjective evaluations by relying on verifiable data. Now, what do we mean by that? It means when I'm dealing with a situation, I'm not looking at how everybody's feeling. I'm not looking at all the outside things. I'm just looking at the straightforward, what are the facts? That's the way men tend to view. Now, there's always a little adjustment depending on your personality. If you're a retriever personality, as a man, you're probably going to be more in tune with people's emotions because that's the retriever personality. And if you're a lion personality, you're not. The emotions are nowhere in the neighborhood as far as you're concerned. You don't even get that at all. It's a double whammy as a man. And so the personality just changes a little bit, but basically women, they're kind of looking all at the whole picture, where we men tend to be kind of tunnel vision and more focused in on when we make a judgment or make a decision. And so we approach it differently. Number 6 there is men tend to generalize, and women, I had to make up a word for this, tend to detailize. Okay? Men tend to generalize where women tend to detailize. And again, personalities can come to play on this a little bit, but as a rule, men, we tend to just kind of look at the overall picture, and because we've got fewer words and we're not in tune with the emotion and everything. It's like I mentioned before, when my mom was still alive, I could talk to my mom for an hour on the phone. Generally, I wasn't talking. I was listening more than talking when we were doing that. I'm not a good talker on the phone with anybody, including my wife. And so I'd be talking on the phone for an hour, and I'd hang up the phone. My wife said, well, what'd she say? I'd say, she's doing good. And in general terms, that was the conversation. But she wants the details. Now, my wife can talk on the phone to her family for 15 minutes and spend an hour telling me what they said. It's amazing how she can expand that out to include so much, I watch a TV program, and I can tell her in 5 minutes what the program is all about. She watches the TV program, and a 30-minute program becomes 45 minutes to an hour, and that doesn't include commercials, It's just the way that we are. And again, personalities will adjust that. It's not true of every man and every woman, but as a rule, we as men tend to be very general and not specific. And even in other areas, like when we talk about our wives, we'll say, well, you're beautiful. Well, what she wants to hear is what is beautiful about her. She wants to hear something like you have beautiful flowing hair, or she wants to hear you have deep, luscious eyes, or whatever else it is. She wants details. But we as men said, I told you you're beautiful. Come on. What else do you need here? And when we say, I love you, that's a general term. What she wants to hear is why you love her, what it is you love about her. She wants some detail in that process. And that's the way that women are and compared to men. So number 7, women identify themselves by who they are, men by what they do. Generally, when you talk with a man, and you're trying to get him to describe himself in some way, the first thing he'll tell you about is what? What he does for a living, about his job. See, it's what he does that defines him. Whether it's his job or a hobby, he might be a fisherman or whatever else it is, it's what he does. Where women are it's more about who they are. We identify ourselves differently. And then number 8 there is that men feel closer and validated through shared experiences, women through shared feelings. See, a man is going to talk about the experience. Hey, we went camping together, and we went down this rapids, and it was really a lot of fun. Now, a woman, she describes the same situation. She's going to talk about who she went camping with and how they're their best friends, and we got to talk about all this stuff. And we went down the rapids, and I was so scared. And it's all about how they felt at the moment, where for us, it's not about the feeling, it's about the experience of doing this together as men. We want the experience. And so it's a very different approach to things in that way. Then number 9, women don't just remember facts. They remember feelings. Now, fellas, if you don't get anything else I say tonight, get this. When you are discussing something that happened in the past. The way you remember it is by the facts of what happened. What your wife is remembering about how she felt at that moment. So she is experiencing those feelings again. And if it was a bad experience and you were the one that caused the bad experience, you are in trouble all over again. You are in just as much trouble today as you were back then because she's feeling today what she felt back then. And that's why it's not a good idea to let your wife go back in history and deal with those things. And ladies, that's why you understand that causes trouble when you do that, because if you don't let it go, you relive those feelings over and over and over and over again, even if he doesn't do it over and over and over again. So one bad incident, you can suffer for 10, 15, 20 or more times because she's feeling that pain again. She's feeling that hurt. Now, it's also the same thing is true in reverse. When you go back and talk about, women like to reminisce. They like to go back and relive the event because they relive the feelings. You know, it's like the marriage, the wedding album. You know, we got a wedding album. We had a photographer for our wedding. He was the college photographer at the Bible college we went to, and he'd been in the Army. And when he was in the Army in basic training, they came down and were looking for people to work at the White House. And this was back during the draft, and he had been drafted. And they said, well, if you work at the White House, it will fulfill your draft obligation. And so he volunteered. And he ended up working at the White House as a photographer. He worked through 3 different administrations, and he was a photographer at the White House. So really great photographer. And he did our wedding. And we got this beautiful album of pictures. I haven't looked at them, I don't know how long. You know why? Because I was there. Why do I need to look at the pictures? Because I was there. Now, my wife likes going back and look at pictures like that. Because when she looks at the pictures, what's going on? All the emotion of the moment. See, she's reliving the emotion of it, where I'm just saying, well, yeah, that's what happened. I was here, you were there, we said I do, we got married. Why do I need a picture to tell me that? So we approach things differently. So that's why women like to reminisce. And sometimes it's good to get your wife to reminisce about the good things that happened and not the bad things. Sometimes we'll go back and reminisce about different vacations or stuff like that. And sometimes the reason I do is because I want to get her happy. And then all of a sudden we'll come up, what about this one? Oh, no, we don't want to talk about that one. That was not a good one there, you know. It's like our honeymoon. I got sick when we got married. I ended up with a lockjaw. I mean, our honeymoon was not we don't talk about that. Let's go on to something else. I don't want to relive those emotions again. Okay, let's go on. So understand, fellas, she is feeling whatever you're talking about. If there were feelings involved with it, which there is, the emotions are being relived. But ladies, he's not doing that as a rule. Number 10 there, men don't remember facts. Oh, but go back to number 9. One other thing. Because those memories are burned in their psyche, it's not just in their mind, but it's emotionally. That's why women don't forget. 20 years ago, you. Why? Because that was burned in there with the emotion. It's more than just a memory here. It's an emotional memory. And emotional memories are stronger than mental memories. And that's why you understand. And ladies, but you understand, that's not fair to keep bringing up the emotion. Making your husband suffer again and again and again for something he did one time, but every time it comes up, whether it's through discussion or whether it's through some kind of reminder or whatever, you're making him suffer again for something you've already supposedly forgiven him for. And you got to be careful of that. Number 10, men don't remember facts as much as experiences. So we do remember the facts, but it's more of the experience. This is why we like experience. Men, as a rule, like to experience things more because that's what stays with them. Now, girls or women are more interested in relationships. Generally more interested in relationships than men are. They want to develop relationships Again, if you're an otter, it's different than if you're a beaver and so on, or a retriever. But as a rule, women are more relationally oriented. And so when they get together, when women get together, it's about the relationship. When men get together, it's about the experience. We talk about what we did. Hey, remember when we did this? Where women talk about what they talked about and what they felt and all about, it's all about being together. Number 12, boys and men are just big boys, right? Are more interested in rules and fair play. Now, notice the word fair is in italics, okay? Because I know some of you ladies thinking, yeah, my husband's never fair when we play games. No, he is fair according to his rules. Yes. See, my wife's always complaining about it, but I know what the rules are, and my rules are right. And we're going to play by my rules because that's fair. And so men generally, they're more interested in the rules, even if they are the ones that make up the rules as they go along, but they're rules. And the rules are fair. Where when a woman plays a game, there are very different reactions. See, women play games to enjoy being together. Men play to win. If you want to stay married, don't play games like Stratego with your wife, because you're probably going to lose even if you win. Because we're all about winning. My wife loves puzzles. I hate puzzles. I'm not a puzzle person. I'm the otter personality. I can't sit that long. I can't focus that long. I'm just not big into puzzles. So she's got this big puzzle spread on the table, and she spends hours on that puzzle. I mean, she'll sit there and spend hours trying to find pieces to put it together. I'll walk up, I'll find one piece, I'll stick it in place, and it's like, yeah, look at that. And I'll walk away because I won. She's been hours there, and I found the piece right away. She doesn't know I was looking at the puzzle when she was in the bathroom, figuring out where that piece was, so I could do that, you know. But we're just kind of like, it's like putting one piece in place is like we do our victory dance, like watching the football guys, you know, in the end zone there. And because men want to win. And it's hard for us not to crush our wives. You know, we play a game, we want to crush them, we want to beat them. And that's why we keep making up new rules, because it gives us the advantage. And not only is that true in games, but we see that in really all of our life. So we need to understand that. So we're different. We're different physically. We're different mentally. We're different emotionally. And you can begin to see how some of these work together, because women hear tones differently than men do. They listen to the tone of your voice where we don't catch that. We don't catch that, yeah, go ahead. We don't catch that from them because we're not tuned into that. We're also different spiritually, letter D. Men are designated by God to be the spiritual leader. Go over to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. 1 Corinthians chapter 11. We kind of talked about this already in the 4 commands, but let's go over there. 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse number 3. 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse number 3. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. Sometimes women look at it and say, well, men get to be the leaders. It's not always getting to be the leaders. Those of you in leadership know sometimes it's not getting to be the leaders. You have to be the leader. And we are designated by God to be the spiritual leader in our home. Go over to Ephesians chapter 5 and verse number 23. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 23. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he's the Savior of the body. When we don't leave, there's a vacuum. Now, I'm not talking about a vacuum cleaner. There's a vacuum. There's an emptiness, a hole there. And that the woman is frustrated with that, and probably what she's doing is trying to fill that vacuum. And then that just makes the situation worse now, because she resents having to do what she's not designated by God to do, and the husband resents her doing it, but he's not willing to take the responsibility, and all it does is leave both of them frustrated. So as men, we need to fulfill our designated role of being the leader. If we don't take the responsibility to say the family's going to go to church, then the woman does that. But every Sunday morning, it's a battle to get the kids out of the house. It's a battle to get their husband out of the house. And by the time they get to church, they're frustrated. I have found in most cases when dad says we're going to church, everybody's at church. When mom says we're going to church, not everybody goes. Very rarely do you have a dad come to church by himself without the family. But often you have a wife come to church without the family, or without the husband especially. And after a while, the kids say, well, dad's not going, why do I need to go? It's the husband that needs to take that leadership to budget. It's the husband who takes the leadership to have Bible study or to pray together or whatever else it is. When we don't take that leadership, we leave a vacuum. And a vacuum, the world doesn't like a vacuum. And it's going to suck your wife into that vacuum. And that's just going to create resentment on both sides. Now, sometimes the problem is that the women take that leadership without letting their husbands do that, and that creates a problem as well. But God designated men to be leaders. Women are designed by God to be the completer and the helper. And again, it does not mean that the woman is less. Turn over to Genesis chapter 2. It does not mean the woman is less than the man any more than it means that an enlisted is less than an officer. In every organization, there is leadership that's designated, and the designated leadership is not always the smartest or the best or the right person for the job necessarily, but they have to designate that leadership, and this is the leadership that God has set. And so he's designed the woman to be a completer and helper. The difference here is this. God designated us as men to be leaders, but not all men are by personality designed for leadership. So we have to step into what we're not designed to do necessarily. We have to step up to that role. But with the women, as a rule, God designed women. He created them to be a helpmeet. That's exactly what he made them for. Genesis chapter 2 and verse number 18. It says, the Lord God said, it's not good that a man should be alone. I will make him a helpmeet for him. And then go over to 1 Timothy chapter 2. 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse number 13. 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse number 13. For Adam was first formed, then Eve. So man is designated as leader because he was the first one created, but God designed women to be the helpmeet, the completer. And so women, your job in many ways is easier than the man's job. Because God purposely made you to fit in that role. Where we as men, we have to learn how to do that role. And so it takes more work for us to take that leadership responsibility. But when you don't complete him, you become his competitor. Get that down. When you don't complete him, you become his competitor. You become the competition. Because now you got two heads. And anything with two heads, if you had a baby born with two heads, that's a monster. There's something wrong. Anything with two heads is a monster. And so ladies need to fulfill their role of completion to help make their husband what he is supposed to be, the leader of the home. So we're different by personality. We're different by creation, male and female. And then we're different, number 3, by choices. Now, when I say choices, sometimes it's the choices that we make, but often it's the choices that were made for us. But you are unique because of all of your experiences in life. Where you were born, the family you were born into, the birth order, the way you were raised, the things that happened to you when you were growing up. All of these things have changed you and made you unique. And all of these change our relationship. Go over to Titus chapter 1. Titus chapter 1 and verses 12 and 13. Titus chapter 1, verses 12 and 13. One of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said, the Cretians are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. This witness is true, wherefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith. Now, that is not a politically correct statement. It's Titus chapter 1, verse 12 and 13. I'm reading it right. My wife is shaking her head at me. Look in your Bible, Titus, Titus. Okay, right up to everything. Okay, so it's not a politically correct statement. And we live in a world of politically correct, but it's a true statement. And we don't want to have prejudices, and we don't want to put people into a pigeonhole. And there's no absolutes you can say about one group of people that this is true or that is true. But there are general truths that apply across a broad spectrum. In this case, he's talking about the Cretans who Titus was pastoring. He was trying to encourage them and said, listen, even one of themselves, even one of their own people said this, that they're liars and evil beasts and slow bellies. And he said there's a lot of truth to that. It doesn't mean they're all bad, because you know what? Every culture has its pluses and minuses. Every culture has both its good and its bad. Whether it's an ethnic culture, whether you're Filipino or Samoan or Korean or Haole or Hawaiian or whatever nationality, there are certain general truths about your culture. You know, you talk about Italians, they tend to be loud and boisterous, they tend to like to eat, and so there's certain things about Italians that are generally true. Not every Italian, but as a culture, that's true of their culture. Same thing is true as other cultures. I love the Filipinos. I'm so thankful for our Filipino ministry and all the Filipinos in this church, but even the Filipinos have told me that there's good and bad things. Filipinos are some of the most gracious people you will ever meet. They are the kindest people. They are giving people, but they are also some of the most superstitious people you ever meet as a group. They are also some of the bigger gossips as a group. And that's not just my word, that's what Filipinos have told me. And I've seen there's some general truth to that. Why? Because that's part of their culture. There's certain things that are part of the Micronesian culture. There's certain things that are part of the Hispanic culture or whatever it is. And not only part of an ethnic group, but it's also where you're raised. Southerners are different than Northerners. They're just a unique people. And West Coast people are different than East Coast people. The West Coast is a place full of fruits and nuts, you know. And I can say that because I'm from the West Coast, you know. And I grew up there, and I know what they're like. And there are a lot of fruits and nuts in the West Coast. And they're different than, and Midwesterners, don't let me get started on that. You get people that are, you know, I was raised in a welfare culture. My mom was a single mom and was on welfare. And there are certain general truths you can say about that culture. And all those things make us unique and different, not bad or good. There are some things that are bad, and there are some things that are good. And what we want to do is we want to embrace the good and recognize, acknowledge the bad so that we can change it for ourselves and for the next generation as well. So what are our differences in our culture, first of all? Social economic. There's three classes of people as a general rule. You've got the welfare class, which doesn't mean they're all deadbeats. Welfare just means they are in some kind of an assistance. They're subsidized in some way. That's what I grew up. My mom was one of the hardest working women I know, but my dad walked out on us and left us in a difficult situation, and she had to depend on things like food stamps and other subsidies to help us make it as a family. She got out of that as soon as she could, and I'm thankful for that. But there is a welfare class. There's also what I call working class. That's people that generally work from paycheck to paycheck. They don't have a lot of money in the bank. They are able to support themselves, and they work hard and try to provide for their families. And then you have a wealthy class, and that can include middle class and up, where they don't generally have to worry about a lot financially, and they've got money, and they've got a good paycheck, and they've got money in the bank and all the rest of it. And so if you take somebody that's grew up in a welfare society and marry them somebody who grew up in a wealthy society, can you see possibilities of conflict there? I sure can. And so the difference in that can really create conflict within your marriage, if that's the case in your marriage. Garage sale versus no sales. I grew up that we went to Goodwill and we went to garage sales and we looked for a bargain. I had a friend in college that's why he was a pastor's kid. He grew up and, they were always doing coupons and always going to garage sales. And, when they went to the store, they never looked at anything but the sales rack. That's the only place you're allowed to look in the store. You don't look at any place. That's what my wife does. But he married a girl from a very well-to-do family. And he was telling about the first time he took her to Goodwill. That was almost divorce. You mean you want me to wear a dress that was worn by somebody else? And then he also tells about the first time she went shopping and came home with a dress that cost over $100. Oh! His mom never spent that much on a dress. Conflict. She just didn't sale rack. You didn't look at sale rack. That meant everybody else had rejected it already. You didn't use coupons because you didn't need to. And there's conflict there. Another area of conflict is traditional family versus blended family versus dysfunctional family. Traditional, blended, and dysfunctional. Traditional. How many of you grew up in a traditional family, mom, dad, and kids? Raise your hand. You grew up in that kind of family, all right? How many of you grew up in a blended family where there was a mom, a dad, and a stepmom, stepdad, and whatever else there? How many grew up in that kind of situation, all right? And how many grew up in a dysfunctional family like I did where it's a single mom, a single dad, or there's dysfunctional like my dad was an alcoholic or whatever. There was really major problems within your family. Raise your hand, all right? So you see, now that changes the dynamics of the relationship. My wife grew up with a mom and a dad. Yeah, they had their problems, but they've been married how many years now? 69 years. I grew up, my dad left when I was 7 years old. She grew up with a dad. If you ever met her dad, he's a big guy, scary guy. But I don't think he ever once hit her, struck her in any way. My dad beat me. Do you not think that affected the dynamics of our relationship? If you don't, you're crazy. My dad never did that. Why are you doing that? And so those dynamics change your relationship. And you've got to take those into account. And you've got to resolve and work through those issues and understand each other. Family traditions are included here, by the way. We never did it that way when I was growing up. Oh, that's one of the worst things you can say to your husband or your wife. Or just understanding them. Give you an example. Whenever we go to see my kids, we're going to be taking a vacation in November, and we're going to go down and see my grandkids. And whenever we go see the family, kids or grandkids, one of the things that I do whenever we leave, when we're there, we're buying things for grandkids left and right, and stuff like that. And I'll, my daughter's washer's not working, I'll get it repaired or whatever needs to be done. And I spend money, okay? And my wife's not the spender. That's already a little bit of a conflict because she's very frugal. The word is parsimonious. Good word to learn. It means cheap, but it sounds nicer, okay? She's parsimonious, she's frugal, which is what I love about her, but also I hate about her sometimes, And I'm the opposite of that. I am somewhat cheap. I like a bargain, but at the same time, I will spend money. And so I'll go spend money left, right. And then when we leave, I pull out my wallet and I start handing out. I give my daughter or my son, I give them $20. You can ask Caleb about every time we go to the airport and he fly back to college, I'd pull out and give him a $20 bill. Even if they don't need it, I give it to them. You know why I do that? Because we were growing up, my grandfather would come out to visit us from Connecticut. He lived in Connecticut, we lived in California. My mom was a single mom. I think the only reason he came out was because he knew what our situation was. He would come out at the end of every summer before the school year started, and when he'd come out, he'd buy all of us clothes for the school year. We always knew when he got there, the day after he got there, we're going to go shopping for clothes. He would also buy all kinds of food to fill up the refrigerator and cupboard. And he'd always say, well, I want this and I want that. But he'd never eat it before he leaves. And the last thing he would do when he would leave, when we took him to the airport, I remember watching him pull out his wallet and give my mom some money and to give each of us kids some money as well. So guess what I do? She'd get mad at me for that. You've already done all this for him. We don't have the money. We can't afford that. And I remember one time, it got kind of an argument. We were leaving, we were driving away, and it was kind of an argument. And I got real quiet for a while. And finally, I really was teary-eyed. I said, honey, you need to understand. When I give that money out, it's like I'm honoring my grandfather. It's a memory for me. And it means something to me. And you have to let me do this. But see, that was a tradition until she understood it created conflict. But as she began to understand it, it created a relationship and understanding. By the way, the other thing my grandfather told me, he said it's really curly white hair. And I used to ask him how you get curly white hair. And he said, you eat the holes in Swiss cheese. And I guess I haven't figured out how to do that yet because I haven't got the curly white hair. But there's family traditions. So these socioeconomic background, your ethnic differences. When you marry a non-American, by that what I mean is somebody was not raised in America. They were born and raised in another country and either moved here to marry you, which some people have that situation, or they moved here and you met them somewhere after that and they married you. But their primary years in growing up, in formative years, were when they were in a foreign country. And that makes a difference. Boy, when you're married to somebody that grew up maybe without what you have, grew up in a different economy and a different mentality. You know, there's some places people grow up, they don't even have a wood floor, they have a dirt floor. That makes a difference. And when you bring a cross-cultural marriage in there, that's going to create conflict on both sides. And then you got the hyphenated American, the Hispanic American, or the Filipino American, or the African American. This is a person who was born in America, but their family culture is still Hispanic or Italian or whatever it is. With our Filipinos in our church, we got some Filipinos that are Filipinos. They were born and raised in the Philippines and haven't been in America long enough to take the Filipino. You can take the Filipino out of the Philippines, but you can't take the Filipino out of the Filipino. You know, and they're still Filipino. And then we got other ones that they were born in the Philippines, but they've been over here long enough. They're probably more American than Filipino. And then you got the Filipinos that were born in America, and although they were raised by Filipinos, they're second generation, they still have that. They know enough of the language to be dangerous, you know, but they don't know how to make lumpia the right way. They look Filipino, but they're bananas. They're yellow on the outside and white on the inside. And so they're not quite there. And so you got the hyphenated American. And then you've got the un-American. Now, what do I mean by that? Un-American, what I mean is your view. We see that in America right now. You're un-American if you are against homosexuals. Or you're un-American if you're for homosexuals. Those are extremes. But I bet every one of you in your relationship, there's something secretly, if you've not said it in your mind, you're thinking, my husband and my wife is not American because they do this or believe that or whatever. My wife's got some of those. There's things that she looks at me that, and it's not just American, it's just culturally, we have a different background. Geographic background. You don't have to come from a different country to have a mixed marriage. Anybody here, northerner and southerner, married together? Anybody like that? That starts the Civil War all over again. You put an Easterner with a Westerner, two very different cultures. And then Midwestern, that's where my wife's from, Midwest. I want to go home tonight. All right, number B there, country bumpkin versus city slicker. How many were raised in the country? How many raised in the city? How many raised in the suburbs? That's different than the city too, isn't it? And that comes in next, suburbs versus city. All those are different. My wife's raised out in the country. Her hometown, I think it has, 200 people, counting the cats and the dogs. At one point, they had an outhouse. I mean, they lived on a farm. I remember one time we were driving around and said, hey, look at that tractor in the field. And she said, you idiot, that's not a tractor, that's a combine. Well, how am I supposed to know that? You ever heard the word common sense? There's no such thing as common sense. You know why? Because none of us have anything in common. We have very little in common. Common sense means common experiences. And what's common sense to a country person, that common sense is you don't walk in the cow pasture with bare feet. Think about it. Common sense, the guy in the city, is there's certain parts of the city you don't go to. I was raised in the suburbs. I remember I was down in Mobile, Alabama, and I was trying to find a friend's house. I couldn't find his house. I was lost. And so I saw a telephone booth, and I pulled over and went to the telephone booth and called him up, because before cell phones. And I told him where I was, and he says, "You're where? Get back in that car and get out of there as fast as you can." He said, "What kind of idiot are you getting out of your car in that part of the town?" No common sense. Why? Because I didn't have that common understanding of certain parts of town you didn't get out of your car in. You see what I'm saying? That makes us different. And then you go on in this list here, and you got childhood experiences, birth orders. How many of the firstborns? How many firstborns here? Oh, the privileged. How many are the babies of the family? The spoiled ones. How many are middle children like me? The perfect ones, okay? Your birth order changes who you are. There's studies been done. Firstborns are different than babies of the family, and they're different than middle children. And then you've got the only child. If you're married to an only child, please tell me so I can put you on my daily prayer list. That changes us. Imagine 13 kids. What do you figure you're in now? You're number 7 or number 5 or whatever, you know? These are all change that. Education level. Put a college graduate with a high school graduate or lower. IQ level. I remember counseling a couple one time. She was an officer, he was enlisted. She had a college degree, he barely had a high school degree. She was a lion, he was a retriever. Do you see any problems coming up in that relationship? Now, could they make it work? Yes, as long as they went in with their eyes opened and were honest about it and worked through those issues. But if you're married in that kind of situation, you got a wife that's got a more training than you do and more smarter than you are, she can look down and say, "Yeah, you're telling me what to do?" It's hard not to do. If you got a wife that's older, age difference is another one we'll talk about. That's number 4. If you got a wife that's older than her husband, especially if it's like 10 years older, something like that, every time he says what to do, say, "Hey, buddy, you wear diapers when I was deciding what to do." That's an issue. Education level. Number 3, traumatic experiences. If you or your wife has been abused, I went through a very traumatic experience as a child. That changed me. It affects me even today, 61 years of age. That's still part of who I am. Neglect. If you were neglected, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, all that changes you. Your husband, you were abused emotionally when you were a child, yelled at all the time. Your husband raises his voice just a little bit. All of a sudden, you're like a pup. Ah! Why are you so scared? Why are you so upset with me? He didn't do anything wrong. You're reacting to the emotional abuse you grew up with. Sexual experiences. If he's been in pornography, that's going to affect not only your sex life, but every other area of your life. That's why, by the way, singles, young ladies, you want to find out. You want to make sure of that before you marry him, because it doesn't just automatically change the marriage. Abuse, sexual abuse. I think I read one study where 80% of women have been abused at some point in their life sexually by a family member or somebody else. Some rape and drastic things, some just touching, but they've been abused. That's going to affect them. I've counseled some situations where the husband would reach just over touch her and she'd pull back and he's, "What's wrong with me? You mad at me?" It wasn't him. It was remembering what happened to her. But he didn't know that. And he thought it was him. Sexual experiences as far as premarital sex. How many people have you been with, and how much premarital sex? And was it even with each other? That affects your relationship. Even the fact that you were premaritally had sex with each other, it affects your relationship after you're married until you get it right with God, especially. Life-changing events. Somebody died. Somebody moved away a lot. You know, somebody grew up in the military, moving every 2 or 3 years, and somebody has never moved in their life, and all of a sudden they marry somebody in the military and they take them away from home where they'd never left home before. Do you think that's going to be traumatic? Think it can affect your relationship? It sure is. Divorce. financial problems, sickness, catastrophe. All of these things affect who we are. We're going to have to stop here. Age different, especially if she's older. We're going to stop there. We'll finish up the last part of this notes next week and finish up talking about our differences. And then we're going to talk about how do we then take those differences and help us to be stronger rather than have conflict.